I'm Kevin Jacobsen of Gold Derby here with Brian Kane, production designer for Yellowjackets. So right off the bat, I have to say this is such a fascinating blend of contemporary and period, with these two separate time periods really in every episode, throughout the whole season. So where do you start, basically? What was the initial vision that was presented to you?
Well, what was really unique about the project was that um, the time periods aren't treated like flashbacks. They actually run concurrently um, uh, throughout the season, and they influence each other. So the conversation started early on about being really true to the time period and to the genre, um, but being very real and very subtle at the same time. We didn't want to be hitting anybody on the head with, we're in the 90s now.
Right. Well, you do get to do quite a bit with the 90s in that first episode where we see all of the girls in their regular life, and especially like their bedrooms is where they're really expressing themselves. What were the sort of important elements that you wanted to include for those pre-crash scenes about each of the main characters?
We really wanted to make sure that we dived into the background of each of the characters. I didn't do the pilot. We reshot a good portion of the pilot. So watching the pilot was my introduction to those characters as well. There was some recasting that was done once the show came to Vancouver. But what was interesting was you get a real sense of the hierarchy of the group. I mean, there's a bit of a Lord of the Flies-esque feeling to the show, which is all about hierarchy in society. So it's interesting being introduced to all those characters in their non-heightened state, like when they're in high school, when they're on the soccer field, when they're at a party, who's the queen of the jungle and who's not.
Right. Well, obviously, we also have the wilderness being the setting for most of that 90s storyline. Can you talk about just that area in Vancouver where you filmed?
Yeah, for sure. What's interesting is for us, the wilderness isn't just a location, it's a character in our show. It is both the captor and the savior for our girls. It's what held them, what motivated them, but it's also what fed them and what rewarded them. We found this amazing place in Surrey, British Columbia, called Panther Paintball, and there's a lot of. It's hard to shoot in the forest, oddly enough. Um, uh, we want to preserve the forest as much as possible. By going into this working forest, we were able to, bring in our 727 airplane. We were able to utilize this amazing, I think it's about 12 acres, this location, and it's got hills and forests and rivers, and we were able to build cabins and make it so much more than what it was as well.
Yeah. Well, I'm also curious about, you mentioned the plane. Just how much of a challenge was there in either, finding a period specific plane, or actually was that a build? Like, how did that come together?
It was probably the biggest challenge for us. We kind of came to the table a little late. We only had 6 or 7 weeks prep on that show, and our mandate was to try and have basically everything ready for the first week. So I have this amazing art department and construction coordinator that I've been working with for a long time. And we are indeed the airplane down into 10-foot chunks. I mean, first we tried to find one, and I actually found one in Arizona, I think, recently decommissioned. But we weren't going to be able to get it chopped up and shipped in time. It's still for sale if anybody wants it. Um, so we ended up building it. We got lucky. I actually remembered 15 years ago seeing airplane parts in a farm way out in the country from snakes on a plane. Um, and so we searched out that farm because it was only in memory, and got lucky. And I was able to find these rotting plane pieces, which at least gave us form, so we didn't have to carve and sculpt everything fresh. Because the process is you need to sculpt it, then you need to vacuum form it, then you need to assemble it, and you need to paint it. So we skipped an important step. So we built it into these 10-foot sections that were able to go onto a flat deck truck with a high ab lift. We built a road through the forest in order to get them to where we wanted to. We did a lot of research. Got in touch with you know, the Federal Aviation Department. Got a lot of information about that type of plane, the debris fields, you know, what a crash would look like coming from that particular height, what it would look like when it landed in the forest. And we started again with the blessing of the owners of this paintball place. We started building the forest to look like a plane had cut a window through it. And we placed it in, and we got that built in 6 weeks at the same time as we were building Tiesa's New York townhouse, and we were building Shauna's rancher. It was a busy 6 weeks.
Wow. That's incredible. I do want to also speak to those houses that you just mentioned. You know, the modern day scenes, again, it's all contemporary. I was on a Reddit thread for Yellowjackets, and there was a post that was like praising your work with how each of their houses in the modern day really do reflect just who they are and like where they are in life. Like, you know, Shauna having kind of an empty bedroom, or, you know, like Misty really decorating her place in a way that shows that she hasn't really changed all that much. Can you actually talk about designing each of those interiors relatively briefly, because we don't want to be here all day, but just
Yeah,
for the four main characters?
no problem. Well, what was a lot of fun for us is, again, I mentioned that the forest was a character in our show, and we wanted to show the forest influence in the modern day locations as well. So, you know, the concept behind for everybody, let's start with, is that you know, this is a backstory. It's a read between the lines kind of thing that we came up with. Is that the girls each got a payout from the airlines for the crash, so they had a nest egg to start their lives. For Shauna, for instance, you know, her and Jeff bought this house, and then Jeff started his business, which he bought from Jackie's father, actually, as we find out later on in the series. And squanders everything. So it's you know, a 70s, 80s rancher. It hasn't changed. But I picked the colors. You know, the subtlety of the artwork is all supposed to have the forest influence. Shauna is this, you know, she's the rock solid mother, family lady, who wants to give the impression that everything is okay. And we see throughout the series that if there's anybody who is not okay, it's probably her.
Mhm.
Melanie Linsky's amazing. Thaisa, she's this power lady, New York, she's gentrifying a neighborhood. We found this, the idea again was sort of she did the renovation. So she came into this neighborhood, she's making it better. But I wanted to show her taste and her power. It's a powerhouse for sure. But subtly, the forest is still knocking on her door. She's got this, her back deck is this overgrown jungle of plants with this giant tree that the bad lady is in. I chose this amazing mural from a Polish artist for her dining room, which is this jungle scene. The colors that I picked for her walls are all in the deep greens. So there's that influence. Misty, one of my favorite characters. We came up with this idea that Misty's father was a doctor. Again, we write our own backstories. Misty's father was a doctor, and she would get 5-year-old design magazines out of his office, and that's her idea of what her sense of style is. She does it in the bunker, and she did it in her house. It's always sort of 5 years out of date, and it is a snapshot of what design is supposed to be. And it's influencing Misty's personality as well, because I don't think really Misty knows how to be. She watches the other girls and she emulates them. And then there's Natalie, who, despite her trauma, is probably the strongest of the bunch. Her nomadic background is mimicked in the choice of location for her to live in this motel. We chose these patterns and the colors of the motel, again, to give us a sense that she is always in the forest too. And what's really neat about Julia is that she chose to do a lot of scenes lying in the carpet, like she's lying in the ocean of forest. It's very cool.
Yeah, it really is. Hearing you explain it, you see the character influence in every single location. So again, like the level of detail in this show, it makes sense that there's Reddit threads that are breaking down everything. But I'm also curious with the modern scenes. It's supposed to be set in New Jersey, even if you're filming in Vancouver. I'm just curious how much that location of it being in New Jersey had an influence over the design.
Very much so. Ashley and Bart are the creators of the show. They're both Jersey kids, and they wrote what they knew. Going so far in the original scripts is calling out real businesses and real hotels and places. So we did our research, and we tried our damnedest to find those things in Vancouver. We're West Coast. It's hard to do, it's hard to do New York and LA, and it was hard to do Jersey and Vancouver. But we have an amazing cinematographer. We really picked our frames carefully, and we tried to do Jersey justice.
Yeah.
The roadside motel was a perfect example of like a sort of an iconic, mid-century roadside motel from Jersey.
Right. Can you speak more to working with Ashley and Bart as showrunners, and just like if there's anything special or different about the way that they lead that sort of stood out to you?
Ashley and Bart, and Jonathan for that matter, they had a very clear vision, but what was really interesting about working with them is they kept a lot of stuff close to the bone. I mean, we did not have 10 episodes starting out. Um, uh, and um, they were very clear and concise about the tone, and about detail, but they left out a lot of future from their stories. Um, perfect example um, was the ceramic bunnies that are all over Shauna's house, um, that we dressed in. They were dressed in the pilot, so we dressed them in the series. And it wasn't until episode 6 or 7 that I learned what the story behind them was. And there was a lot of that. I I was not aware of what was going to happen in episode 10. So it's interesting working with them because while they're incredibly detailed, and incredibly specific, they also leave a lot up to the imagination for us as well. It was a cool collaborative effort, but it also left room for myself and costume designer and props and set decorator and cinematographer to fill in our own blanks as well, which is always fun for us.
Right. Well, I did allude to the fan response earlier. It really has been wild to see how the show has really found a following that they are obsessing over every detail. Just curious if you've been plugged into any of that, if you've read some of the theories and the threads of what people are saying.
A little bit. It's kind of funny. Fan theory is a funny thing. There's such an incredible amount of details that we are required to do in ostensibly an 11-day schedule. From the time that we get a script to the time that we shoot a script is basically it's an 11-day prep when you're shooting a series. So mistakes happen. One of the mistakes that happened, for instance, we were talking about Shauna's parents Jackie's parents. When Shauna went to Jackie's house for her birth death day, which is, this yearly event, she went up to her room and found a photograph of her and Jeff in a diary. So I gave the task, which was supposed to be just a background piece. Details were not relevant, so we really didn't focus on it. I gave the task to my art department assistant and said, hey, listen, let's have some fun, okay? So, I need you to write in a teenage girl's script hand, just what your favorite movies, your favorite movie star, your favorite music, 1993, 1994, 1995. One of the things she did was her favorite movies, and she got the date wrong. So a lot of 7 of the 10 movies were from 1997. There was a subreddit that came up with this fan theory that Jackie was a time traveler as a result. And another one that she was not dead, but she was actually locked up in a psych hospital for the last 25 years. So it's amazing the way people feed upon each other with these fan theories. It's
Yeah,
actually it's a lot of fun to watch.
I imagine it also might put some pressure, even more pressure on you to make sure everything is correct.
Right? Or in season 2, Jackie's going to have to be a time traveler.
Well, there you go. We'll
Yeah.
see what happens. All right. Well, for those of you watching, subscribe for more interviews and go to goldderby.com to make your Emmy predictions. Thank you so much, Brian. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Kevin. It was a pleasure meeting you. I'm glad you enjoyed the show.
Yes.
I did too.